Did you ever wonder where money comes from? But do we really understand the monetary system we have and how it affects almost every aspect of our life? Like many things, there is nothing new under the sun. There has been some form of money almost since the beginning of the earth. First, what is the international monetary system? The international monetary system is a set of internationally agreed rules, conventions, and supporting institutions that facilitate international trade, cross-border investment, and generally the reallocation of capital between nation-states. It should provide means of payment acceptable to buyers and sellers of different nationalities, including deferred payment. To operate successfully, it needs to inspire confidence, to provide sufficient liquidity for fluctuating levels of trade, and to provide means by which global imbalances can be corrected. The system can grow organically as the collective result of numerous individual agreements between international economic factors spread over several decades. Alternatively, it can arise from a single architectural vision, as happened at Bretton Woods in 1944. But let's start at the beginning of time. Ever wonder why there are so many different forms of currency across the world? In South America, the peso is the common currency name. However, a place like Brazil and Peru have their own currency names, like the real or the sol. Currency has been around for thousands of years, even though it may not have been called currency. For example, in ancient times, people bartered for things like sheep was worth 3 bushels of wheat, or 5 sheep was the price of a chariot. While there was no central government determining the value, the two individuals did. Later, people began to understand certain metals like gold and silver had some value. So now things were purchased based upon the weight of gold or silver. However, it became difficult to carry around a bag of silver or gold. So these precious metals were melted into coins of various weights to signify their value. The good thing about these coins, then, they could be used all over the known world, which was not very large at that time, which fostered international trade. Finally, governments became involved in the minting of coin. Remember, Jesus was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. We often have a vision of the Pharisees handing Judas a bag full of silver pieces. It had to be heavy to carry around, so a new method of currency had to be developed. Paper currency came into existence as long ago as the 7th century in China. It spread to Europe through the travels of Marco Polo. But why would anyone accept paper currency as it had not any value of itself? Well, the early forms of currency acted as a form of a promissory note, and was redeemable for a specified amount of gold or silver when presented to the issuer. As we stated, gold in the form of coins became the standard medium of exchange. While international trade was limited in ancient times, it happened because payment could be made in gold or silver coins. As the volume of international trade increased to the Industrial Revolution, there needed to be a more convenient method of payment, and it needed to be found quickly. Shipping large amounts of gold and silver as payment was not practical. So governments began to agree to create paper currency that could be converted into gold on demand at a fixed rate. Thus, the establishment of the gold standard. By the late 1800s, pegging one's currency to gold and agreeing to its convertibility had been accepted by most major countries. Given a common gold standard, the value of any currency in units of any other currency was easy to determine. For example, the US dollar was valued at 23.2 grains of gold, while the British pound was valued at 113 grains of gold. Thus, the British pound was worth $4.87. The gold standard was in effect until the start of World War I, when the governments abandoned the gold standard to finance massive military expenditures by printing money that caused a rapid increase in inflation. For several years, the gold standard was not followed. However, After the end of World War I, countries began to return to using the gold standard. However, due to the increased printing of currency, people lost confidence in the gold standard. With the start of the Great Depression, many people had lost confidence in the gold standard and the ability to convert paper into gold. By 1939, the gold standard was dead. Something new was needed. But World War II intervened. Toward the end of World War II, representatives met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design a new international monetary system. Remember, the last 10 years have seen the collapse of the gold standard, a devastating period of global depression, and a global war that destroyed the lives of hundreds of millions of people. With this as a backdrop, the participants were forced on building an economic system that would promote post-war economic growth. Wanting to avoid constant devaluations and revaluations of currencies, there was a desire to have fixed rates of exchange. The problem was who would oversee this new economic order, thus the creation of the IMF and World Bank. The IMF, or International Monetary Fund, was to be the custodian of the new foreign exchange system through a combination of discipline and flexibility. From a discipline perspective, the fixed exchange regime imposes discipline in two ways. One, a fixed exchange rate stops competitive devaluations and brings stability to the world trade environment. And two, a fixed exchange rate system imposes monetary discipline on countries, thereby controlling price inflation. Regarding flexibility, it was recognized a totally fixed exchange rate system would not work, so there needed to be a limited degree of flexibility. The new system allowed for a limited devaluation of 10% if the IMF viewed that a country's balance of payments was in fundamental disequilibrium. The World Bank, officially known as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, BRD, was established to help in the reconstruction of war-torn economies, primarily in Europe. This was accomplished by providing very low-interest loans. The fixed exchange rate system lasted until 1973, when it collapsed due to the rise of the U.S. dollar as the currency of choice globally. The breaking point in the system started in the mid-1960s, when the U.S. pursued fiscal policies, increased government spending to finance the Vietnam War and new social welfare programs. The increase in inflation and the worsening trade balance led to currency speculation in the U.S. dollar. After weeks of discussion and negotiations, a temporary solution was implemented to manage the rampant increase in currency speculation and allow certain currencies, at the time the Japanese yen and European countries, to float against each other. This temporary float system has been in place for over 40 years. Floating exchange rates, while providing flexibility, has also led to greater volatility and speculation. The floating exchange rate regime has three main elements that have made it effective over time: monetary policy autonomy, trade balance adjustments, and crisis recovery. While floating exchange rates are not the norm worldwide, as there are other systems in place. A managed float regime is the current international financial environment in which exchange rates fluctuate from day to day, but the central banks attempt to influence their country's exchange rate by buying and selling currencies to maintain a certain range. The peg is known as a crawling peg. The peg exchange rate is a form of fixed exchange rate, but the peg is determined by the foreign government central bank. While one would assume the peg exchange rate would moderate inflationary pressures, it does not. Many countries follow a nominal peg and may be willing to devalue their currency rather than pursue tighter monetary policy. So what are the managerial implications for the global finance leader or manager? Companies need to be aware that the combination of government intervention and speculative activity can drive the foreign exchange market, and they need to limit their foreign exchange exposure accordingly. Companies should pursue business strategies that will increase their strategic flexibility in the face of unpredictable exchange rate movements. 3. Businesses can influence government policy toward promoting an international monetary system that minimizes volatile exchange rate movements, particularly when those movements are unrelated to long-run economic fundamentals.